Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe. My channel, my blood turned to ice so fast my fingertips lost sensation before Daniel Whitmore finished saying my name. The 12th floor boardroom at Whitmore Air was washed in hard fluorescent light that flattened everything. The polished walnut table, the silver water pitcher sweating rings on the leather coasters, the glossy framed route maps along the wall. Even the faces turned toward me as if they'd been waiting for a show. Daniel stood at the far end of the table with a sheaf of printed emails in one hand and his other palm spread flat against the wood. Beside him, Celeste Vale sat with one leg crossed over the other, cream silk sleeve grazing the arm of her chair, her engagement diamond scattering little shards of light across the tabletop every time she moved. Richard Whitmore, Daniel's father, didn't look at me at first. He just adjusted the gold cufflink on his left wrist and stared at the papers like a judge preparing a sentence. Marcus Bell from HR hovered near the door with a manila envelope tucked under his arm. Helena Price, our CFO, kept turning pages in a binder she was pretending not to enjoy. Then Daniel lifted the emails and snapped. Explain why confidential maintenance exception reports were sent from your account to an outside address. There it was. No build-up. No courtesy, just a knife. My name is Adrian Mercer. I'm 39, and this is the story of how I let a man fire me for his fiancée, then grounded the airline he inherited with nothing but patience, paperwork, and the truth he thought money could smother. I can still see the room exactly as it was. Celeste's posture was relaxed in that artificial, expensive way people practice in mirrors. Richard kept both hands folded over the knob of his cane, though he didn't need it to stand. He used it like a scepter. Helena's mouth had that thin, satisfied line people wear when they've already decided the outcome. Marcus looked uncomfortable, but not enough to leave. No one in that room thought I had anywhere to go. They'd gathered like vultures around a body they assumed had stopped moving. Daniel took 2 steps toward me and dropped the papers onto the table. We gave you a career. My father trusted you. I trusted you. And this is how you repay us. I looked down. The top page was an email, supposedly sent from my company address to a journalist I'd never contacted. The attachment line read Fleet Risk Exceptions Q2 PDF. Nice touch. Specific. Damaging. Designed to make everyone at the table imagine my fingerprints on it. Celeste tilted her head and said, almost gently, You should probably tell the truth now, Adrian. It always sounds better the first time. She wanted that line to land like perfume. It landed like bleach. Marcus cleared his throat. For the record, this is a termination for cause meeting. Richard finally raised his eyes to mine. Pale blue, dry. I don't enjoy disloyalty, he said, particularly from people we've elevated. People we've elevated. That told me more than the papers did. I had joined Whitmore Air 8 years earlier. We was still a disciplined regional carrier with ambitions larger than its fleet. I had helped take it through 2 compliance overhauls, a near merger, 3 FAA audits, and a kind of post-pandemic route recalibration that broke weaker operators. I knew every maintenance chief by first name, every director who cut corners when no one was looking, every aircraft tail number that had become a silent problem child. Daniel had inherited the airline from Richard 3 years after I came aboard. He liked cameras, growth language, and magazine profiles. I liked systems that kept metal in the sky and people alive inside it. For a while, the arrangement worked. Then he met Celeste. She arrived in the company the way smoke enters a room. Silently at first, then everywhere at once. She was a luxury brand consultant with no aviation background and a talent for making ignorance sound visionary. Within 3 months, she had opinions on cabin retrofits, uniform redesigns, lounge aesthetics, pilot social media etiquette, investor messaging, and route launches. Within 5, she had a private office on the executive floor. Within 6, Daniel started using the phrase modernizing leadership structure, which is executive language where I'm about to reward someone unqualified, and need a phrase that sounds strategic. I had objected only once directly, and I had done it in writing. That was the real reason we were in that room. Not the emails, not the leak, not the performance issue Marcus had been building in secret. This was about the route expansion to St. Lucia and Curacao Daniel wanted announced before quarter end. Even though our maintenance reserves were stretched, Our crew duty buffers were thinning, and 2 of our long-range aircraft had recurring discrepancies I wanted resolved before we sold one more glossy dream to the public. Celeste wanted the launches because she had already lined up a magazine spread about Whitmore Air becoming the new luxury bridge between the Southeast and the Caribbean. I told Daniel no, calmly, repeatedly, in writing. Men like Daniel here know the way some people hear an insult. Say something, he demanded. I pulled out the chair nearest me and sat down. That small act changed the temperature of the room. Marcus blinked. Daniel straightened, as if I'd slapped him. Celeste smiled thinned by 0.5 millimeter. You don't sit until this meeting is... Daniel started. I'd like a glass of water first. I said evenly. The silence that followed was absolute. It spread across that walnut table like clear varnish, sealing every face in place for 1 clean second. Daniel's jaw tightened. Richard's fingers paused on his cane. Helena looked at Marcus as if he should somehow solve me. I reached for the crystal tumbler already set at my place, poured from the silver pitcher, and took 1 slow sip. Deliberate slowness has a way of exposing frantic people. Daniel's breathing got louder. Celeste uncrossed and recrossed her legs. Marcus shifted the envelope from one sweaty palm to the other. Then I set the glass down carefully and said, "Before we continue, I'd like written confirmation that this termination is based on those documents, and I'd like a forensic report establishing chain of custody for materials you're attributing to my account." Marcus stared at me. "The evidence is in front of you." "No," I said. "The printouts are in front of me." Helena shut her binder with a flat, irritated clap. "Adrian, this is not a courtroom." "Not yet," I said. That was when Daniel leaned forward and lost the last of his performance polish. "You smug son of a..." "Daniel." Richard cut in sharply. But Daniel was committed now. "You thought you could embarrass me. You thought you could block this company's future because you didn't like change. You've been insubordinate for months, and now you've crossed into sabotage." Celeste rested her fingertips on his sleeve in a gesture meant to soothe him, though the look she gave me was pure appetite. He was always going to make this difficult. There was again, always. I looked at her for a beat longer than made her comfortable. Was I... Not a question. A note. She looked away first. Daniel shoved the envelope across the table, so hard it skidded into my wrist. "Take the severance, sign the confidentiality agreement, surrender your devices, and be grateful we're keeping this private." I glanced at the envelope, but didn't touch it. Then I reached into my briefcase, removed my company phone, my access badge, and a slim blue folder, and lined them up in front of me with the kind of care people use when setting surgical instruments on a tray. Daniel watched my hands. He thought I was surrendering. Instead, I slid the blue folder toward Marcus. "Please add that to the record," I said. Marcus frowned. "What is it?" "A preservation notice." No one moved. "For the board," I continued quietly. "For outside counsel. For the insurer. For the FAA Certificate Management Office in Atlanta. It advises them not to destroy or alter any records related to maintenance deferrals, account access logs, third-party vendor payments, flight duty variances, or executive communications dating back 6 months." Helena's face lost color first. It happened fast, like someone dimming a light behind her skin. Daniel laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You don't get to threaten us in this room." I met his eyes. "Actually, Daniel, I'm telling you the room just changed." Richard's cane tip clicked against the floor. Celeste's voice came out lighter than I think she intended. "Adrian, if this is some kind of bluff..." "It isn't." Then I opened my briefcase again and took out my personal tablet. That was the moment Act 1 ended for them, though they didn't know it yet. They thought they had cornered me. They thought the envelope on the table made me small. What they didn't understand was that a man who works in aviation for long enough learns one hard truth. Panic kills faster than failure. So I didn't panic. I powered on the tablet, entered my passcode, and watched all 4 of them realize at the same time that I hadn't shown up to defend myself. I had come to start the investigation. I scrolled slowly while Daniel stared as if speed alone could make him intimidating again. "The email you printed," I said, enlarging the metadata on screen, "was generated from my credentials at 11:14 p.m. on June 12th. At that time, My badge was logged entering Hangar 3 for an overnight line inspection with Luis Mendez and Tara Singh. Here's the footage. Here's Tara's sign work log. Here's Luis's text to me complaining about the coffee. I turned the screen toward them. The security still showed me beneath the blue-white hangar lights, reflective tape glowing on my jacket, one hand holding a tablet, the other pointing at an engine cowling. Timestamp, 11:12 p.m. Daniel opened his mouth. I lifted one finger. The email was not sent from my laptop. It was created on the Executive Guest Network from a MacBook registered to Celeste Vale Consulting. Celeste's spine straightened so abruptly her chair squeaked across the floor. "That's absurd," she snapped. "Is it?" I tapped again. IT provided the device registration list to the carrier's cybersecurity insurer after the phishing drill in April. I saved the archive because I'm old-fashioned that way. Helena looked at Celeste so quickly, it was almost involuntary. Daniel recovered first. Anyone could have spoofed that. "Yes," I said. "Anyone with access to my credentials after Marcus authorized a temporary executive review of my inbox." Marcus actually took a step back. His shoulders hit the door. "I didn't," he began. "You did," I said. May 28th, 17 minutes after Daniel's calendar blocked a private meeting titled Leadership Transition. Monica Alvarez created the calendar entry. She also kept the back-end timestamp. At the mention of Monica, Daniel's eyes changed. Not panic yet. Calculation. Good. He was catching up. I took another slow sip of water. Their energy was all sparks and static now, wild and directionless. Mine was a metronome. "The second problem," I continued, "is that in order to make those emails convincing, you attached actual internal reports. Unfortunately, one of those reports includes a version stamped from a file that did not exist until 46 hours after my account was suspended." Helena sank into her chair. Not gracefully. She collapsed into it as if the air had gone out of her knees. Daniel slammed both palms on the table. "Enough." "No," I said. "Now we're at enough." I swiped to the next document. This is Deferred Maintenance Exceptions Q2. The version you printed says, "I approve 6 carry-forward deferrals on aircraft 642, 655, and 661. I didn't. Warren Pike's team entered them after my sign-off authority was removed. Here's the audit trail. Here are the backdated initials. Here's the internal message from Warren to Helena asking whether Adrian's replacement would be more flexible on launch timing. I let that sit in the center of the table. Richard finally spoke. Helena, her lips parted, then closed. She looked at Daniel, which told me everything Richard needed to know. Celeste tried to recover the room. "Even if any of that were true, it doesn't explain why you were undermining Daniel's expansion plan. Please, subscribe my channel." I turned to her. "By refusing to certify aircraft I wasn't comfortable dispatching. You're exaggerating risk." "Actually," I said, "you were committing fraud." The sentence landed like dropped steel. Daniel's face went red, then white. Marcus' mouth fell open. Richard's grip tightened so hard on his cane the skin over his knuckles shone. I kept going because stacked revelations matter. One truth rattles people. 3 truths rearrange them. The vendor receiving brand integration consulting payments from the safety modernization budget? Vale Advisory Group. Owned by Celeste. Approved by Helena. Concealed under a cost code normally used for regulatory training software. Helena whispered, "Daniel, tell him to stop." I ignored her. The pilot recurrent training roster for May included 12 signatures for a session that never occurred because the simulator was offline in Denver, but the roster was submitted anyway to preserve launch eligibility. Marcus said, almost himself, "Jesus." "And the part I'm sure your insurer will find especially interesting," I said, "is that someone accessed my dormant signature certificate 2 days after I was barred from the building and used it to approve a fleet readiness summary for the board." Daniel pointed at me with a shaking hand. "You stole company data." "No," I replied evenly. "I preserved evidence of executive misconduct after realizing I was about to be blamed for it." Celeste's voice rose. "This is blackmail." "No," I said again. "This is documentation." Then I closed the tablet cover with a soft click that sounded louder than Daniel's shouting had. I stood. Marcus instinctively moved aside from the door before I even approached it. "Outside counsel will be in touch," I said. "Until then, I suggest you stop deleting messages and start remembering dates." Daniel came around the table so fast his chair slammed backward. "You're not walking out of here threatening my family." I paused beside him. Up close, I could smell the expensive cedar of his cologne over the sterile chill of recirculated air. "You fired the wrong man for the wrong woman," I said quietly. "That's all." Then I left. The next few days were very calm on my end and very loud on theirs. That difference mattered. People always imagine revenge as a flash, rage, shouting, a dramatic public takedown. Real corporate destruction is quieter than that. It's a draft email sent to the right regulator, a litigation hold that freezes the wrong person's confidence, a timestamp that survives deletion. It's the kind of thing that begins in silence and rolls forward like weather. I spent that first evening in my townhouse in Dilworth with every curtain open and every light off, watching Charlotte turn indigo outside my windows while my laptop glowed on the dining table. The oak floor still held the day's heat. A low jazz station murmured from the kitchen. I made tea, not because I was calm, but because ritual is sometimes the only thing standing between composure and fury. I had known Daniel would move against me for 6 weeks. I just hadn't known whether he'd try to buy me, discredit me, or both. When Monica Alvarez sent me a screenshot of a calendar invite labeled Leadership Transition, and Marcus Bell began asking unusual questions about my device privileges, the shape of the trap became obvious. So I prepared. I hired Naomi Kessler before I was fired. Naomi ran the aviation and corporate misconduct practice at Kessler & Wren, a downtown firm with offices paneled in white oak and a reputation for turning executive lies into exhibits. She was the sort of lawyer who never raised her voice because she never needed to. Her questions were scalpels. Her shoes were always polished. The first time I met her, she listened to me for 40 minutes without interruption, then said, "You don't have a retaliation problem. You have a sequencing opportunity." That sentence bought my loyalty. Luis Ortega came next. Former FAA investigator. Close-cropped silver hair. Patient eyes. He wore off-the-rack sport coats and noticed things no one else did. I had met him during an audit years earlier, when he caught a falsified maintenance notation because the time format on one line didn't match the rest of the document. Most people see paper. Luis saw fingerprints. When I told him I thought Whitmore's executive team was using route expansion pressure to bury operational risk and reposition liability onto me, he asked for 3 things: access logs, maintenance exception histories, and names of people suddenly being promoted. He said sudden promotions were like fresh paint. They usually meant someone was trying to cover a crack. He was right. The week before my firing, I had already mirrored my approved work correspondence to outside counsel, copied every report I was legally entitled to preserve under whistleblower protection rules, and documented every irregular access event tied to my accounts. I had not stolen anything. I had preserved it lawfully, precisely, and with the kind of discipline Daniel mistook for passivity. By Monday morning, Naomi had sent formal notices to Whitmore Air's board, insurer, outside auditors, and regulatory contacts. By Monday afternoon, Daniel's personal attorney sent a 5-paragraph letter calling my claims fabricated, extortive, and career-ending to publish. Naomi framed it and had it delivered to her office because, as she told me later, I enjoy false certainty. It ages so badly. On Tuesday, Helena called me from a block number. I let it ring out. She left a voicemail anyway. "Adrian, I think there's been a misunderstanding. If there are concerns about process, we can address them privately. No one wants this to become bigger than it needs to be." She sounded like a woman tiptoeing across thin ice and pretending not to hear the cracks. I archived the message. Wednesday brought Daniel. His text arrived at 6:11 a.m. before sunrise. "You are making a catastrophic mistake." At 6:14, another. "Call me before this goes too far." At 6:28, Celeste had nothing to do with this. That one made me smile for the first time in days. Men tell on themselves when they think they're controlling a narrative. No one had mentioned Celeste publicly. No filing named her. No letter identified her role. And yet there she was, already lifted out for special protection, like a painting someone rushes to save from a burning house. I sent the screenshots to Naomi. At 10 a.m., Monica Alvarez met me in the back corner of a cafe on East Moorhead called Fig and Ash. Morning sun came to the tall front windows in clean golden bands that lit the brass hardware behind the counter and turned every floating dust mote into evidence. Monica wore navy slacks, a white blouse, an expression of a woman furious at herself for being surprised. Daniel had trusted Monica with everything trivial and everything sensitive, which in executive life are often the same thing. She managed travel, dinners, gifts, board packets, calendar holds, discreet courier pickups, and all the unattractive logistics that make important people feel important. She had spent 6 years making Daniel's life frictionless. In return, he had expected absolute silence. She placed her leather tote on the chair beside her and said he was going to blame me too. I stirred my coffee once. What changed? He used my company card to book a private dining room at Le Jardin for a board culture dinner with Celeste, Helena, and Marcus. Then accounting kicked the receipt back because the memo line said transition planning. When I asked Daniel if I should recode it, he told me not to worry because there would be staff changes soon enough. Her mouth hardened. I heard Marcus later that day asking IT whether assistant-level permissions could trigger message forwarding without user notice. Were they talking about me? They were talking about both of us. She slid a flash drive across the table with 2 fingers. Inside were calendar exports, expense approvals, voicemail transcriptions, courier logs, and one short audio clip Daniel had dictated into his phone for Monica to send to Warren Pike. Push anything Mercer is slowing down. His voice in the recording, flat and impatient. Once we announce the role shift, he won't have final sign-off anymore. Role shift. There it was. The real plan. Finally using its own name. And Celeste. I asked. Monica exhaled through her nose. She said you had to be discredited first. Her exact words were, "No one lets go of a gatekeeper unless they're embarrassed." The phrase sat between us like something rotten. I nodded once and pocketed the drive. Why help me? Monica looked out the window at traffic, sliding past in the morning light. Because I carried enough sealed envelopes to know when I was being prepared to become one. That afternoon, Luis called with the sort of quiet excitement careful men reserve for dangerous clarity. They touched the simulator records, he said. I stood from my desk and walked to the window. Across the street, sunlight flashed on the windshield of the city bus. Somewhere a dog barked twice. The ordinary world kept moving while mine narrowed into focus. Show me. An hour later, we sat in Naomi's conference room with the blinds half open and the long white oak table spread with printouts, USB drives, and yellow tabs. Luis had built a chronology, so precise it looked like a flight plan. Each line item led to another. Route launch pressure, deferred maintenance extensions, altered training rosters, rush board packets, private vendor transfers, my credential compromise, the stage firing. It was all there, not chaos. Design. Luis tapped a line with the back of his pen. May 9th, Denver simulator offline. Manufacturer service bulletin acknowledged, yet recurrent session roster signed as completed. Naomi looked up. Who approved submission? Helena's office routed it. Warren Pike's team uploaded it. Adrian's digital certificate appears on the summary. Naomi's expression did not change. Could they argue administrative error? Luis slid over the next page. Not once there's paired with this. It was a message thread. Daniel to Helena. Need roster clean before investor deck. No delays. Celeste campaign assumes route visuals go live. Naomi leaned back slowly. There it is. What? I asked. The point where vanity becomes premeditation. That was the first night I slept well after being fired. Not because I felt safe. I didn't. People with money, reputation, and a family name on a building do not surrender gracefully. But I had crossed the line every whistleblower eventually reaches, the moment when private suspicion becomes organized proof. After that, fear has less room to move around. Friday morning, Whitmore Air announced, through a carefully bland internal memo, that Celeste Vale had been appointed Executive Vice President of Brand and Strategic Experience, with oversight integration across marketing, premium services, and select transformation functions. Select transformation functions. They dressed the theft in silk. Her headshot accompanied the release. Chin angled, smile practiced, one hand resting on a glass conference table as if she'd personally invented it. 20 minutes later, Naomi filed the first formal complaint. She did not send it to the press. That would have been sloppy. She sent it where it mattered. To the board's independent directors, the airline's insurer, the FAA's whistleblower portal with supporting exhibits, and Whitmore's outside audit committee. She requested preservation of aircraft maintenance records, access logs, vendor contracts, and executive communications. She identified potential falsification of training records, unauthorized use of suspended executive credential, misclassification of payments, and retaliatory termination tied to safety objections. In other words, she didn't accuse them of looking bad. She accused them of being measurable. The response was immediate and chaotic in all the ways we had hoped. Daniel's camp demanded mediation. Richard Whitmore tried to bypass counsel and reach me directly through a mutual donor who sat on a museum board with my mother. Celeste posted a photograph from a charity luncheon in a pale blue dress, smiling beside Daniel under the caption, "Steady Hands." New Horizons. The comments were full of heart emojis and people who had no idea the runway beneath her was already cracking. Then Warren Pike disappeared for 36 hours. Not literally. His phone went dark. He missed 2 scheduled calls. His assistant told operations he was dealing with a family issue. Luis heard that and gave me a look across Naomi's conference room that said exactly what I was thinking. Innocent men don't go temporarily missing when document hold arrive. By Sunday evening, he resurfaced. By Monday morning, he had retained separate counsel. That was the first fracture. The second came from Helena. Naomi received a message from Helena's attorney requesting a confidential discussion about individual exposure distinctions. That phrase translated roughly to, "My client would like everyone to know this was not her idea." Naomi took the call on speaker, with Luis and me in the room. Helena didn't speak directly, but her attorney did enough talking for 3 frightened executives. He floated the possibility that Daniel and Richard had created pressure environments around launch timing, that Celeste had unusually direct involvement in budget designations, and that Helena had relied on representations from operations. Each sentence was a life raft tossed away from the Whitmore family yacht. When the call ended, Naomi said, "They're starting to separate their oxygen." Then she looked at me and added, "Good. Now we schedule the room." 2 weeks after my firing, at 9 a.m. on a gray Thursday morning, we walked into the 22nd floor conference suite at Kessler and Wren. The room was exactly the kind of place powerful people choose when they need to feel civilization protecting them from consequence. Gleaming oak paneling, long black-framed windows overlooking downtown Charlotte, supple leather chairs arranged around a table broad enough to make everyone feel slightly farther apart. Recessed lighting cast a warm, expensive glow across carafes of coffee, legal pads, and neat plates of untouched pastries. Authority hung in the air like polished brass. I arrived with Naomi and Luis. I wore a charcoal suit, white shirt, dark tie, and the watch my mother had given me when I got my first director title. Nothing flashy, nothing emotional, just clean lines and still hands. They arrived 3 minutes later. Daniel entered first, but the difference between this Daniel and the one who had tried to fire me in the Whitmore Air boardroom was visible before he sat down. His tie knot was too tight. There were crescents of fatigue beneath his eyes. He kept adjusting his jacket cuffs, a nervous habit he'd never had when he felt in control. Richard came behind him, broader in the shoulders than age should have allowed, but slower now. The cane was real use today, not theater. Celeste followed in a winter white suit with a structured collar and gold earrings shaped like small drops of light. She held her phone too tightly. Helena arrived with her attorney and a stack of notes she did not once look at. Marcus Bell looked as if he hadn't slept in a week. Warren Pike came last with separate counsel, face ashen, mouth set in the stubborn line of a man who had already practiced saying I relied on others. And Monica Alvarez was already seated on our side of the table. That was the first real shock of the day. Daniel stopped mid-step. Celeste actually whispered, "No." Monica didn't look at either of them. She had a legal pad in front of her, a pen aligned exactly parallel to its edge, and a slate-gray blazer that made her appear more composed than anyone else in the room. Naomi gestured for everyone to sit. "Thank you for coming. We are here to address Mr. Mercer's retaliatory termination, preservation obligations, and substantial regulatory exposure created by actions taken by Whitmore Air leadership over the last several months." Daniel's attorney, Paul Renwick, tried to wrestle back the opening. "My clients deny." Naomi lifted one hand. "You'll have time to deny things. I'm going to begin with dates." That was Naomi's gift. She never argued morality first. She argued chronology. Morality follows timestamps more reliably than speeches. Luis distributed binders. Heavy, tabbed, indexed. Each thud on the oak table sounded like a latch closing. Daniel didn't touch his for a moment. Richard did. He opened his binder with the grim caution of a man approaching medical results. Naomi began. "March 3rd, she said, Mr. Daniel Whitmore announces his engagement to Miss Celeste Vale at a private dinner at the Piedmont Club. March 5th, Ms. Vale's consulting firm, Vale Advisory Group, loses 2 major hospitality accounts. March 9th, internal discussion begins regarding a compensated executive role for Ms. Vale at Whitmore Air. March 12th, Mr. Mercer issues written objections to Caribbean route launch timing due to maintenance reserves, training cadence, and aircraft readiness." Daniel shifted in his chair. Celeste kept staring at Naomi, as if stare alone could count as rebuttal. March 18th, Naomi continued, Mr. Whitmore sends a text from Ms. Price stating, quote, "Adrian is becoming a bottleneck. We need structural flexibility before Q3. That text is in tab 4. Helena shut her eyes for 1 second. April 2nd, Ms. Vale is added to internal budget. Reviews despite holding no company title. April 4th, a private dinner is held at Le Jardin. The expense is processed through executive operations with the memo line transition planning. April 7th, Mr. Bell authorizes an access review on Mr. Mercer's accounts. April 14th, maintenance exceptions previously rejected by Mr. Mercer are resubmitted. April 19th, simulator downtime in Denver is flagged. May 9th, a training roster is nevertheless certified as complete. May 28th, Mr. Mercer's suspended signature certificate is accessed. June 12th, a fabricated leak email is generated from his compromised credentials. June 14th, he is terminated for cause. June 14 at 10:43 a.m., preservation notices are transmitted by this firm. She closed the first binder section. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a sequence. No one answered. Outside, a helicopter crossed the window line in slow motion, sunlight flashing against his body like a knife blade. Inside, only the muted hum of the HVAC remained. Paul Renwick cleared his throat. "Even if we accept some of those dates, your interpretation is speculative." Louis spoke for the first time. His voice was low and dry. "The dates are not speculative. They're cross-corroborated through server logs, payroll allocations, building access records, expense approvals, and retained mobile exports." Then he opened a folder and slid out 3 photographs. One showed Warren Pike entering the records room at 11:38 p.m., carrying 2 archive boxes. Another showed him leaving at 12:21 a.m. with 1 box and no jacket, sweat darkening the back of his shirt. The third showed the box later appearing in Helena's secured finance office. Warren stared at the images as if they were speaking in a language he no longer understood. "My team also reviewed metadata on the deferred maintenance exceptions file," Luis said. "The document printed at Mr. Mercer's termination meeting was altered after his credentials were disabled. The embedded signature object tied to Mr. Mercer's account was inserted from a machine registered to executive guest access. That machine belonged to Vale Advisory Group." Celeste looked to Daniel. Daniel looked to Paul. Paul looked to the table. Naomi didn't let the silence dissipate. Whitmore Air also routed payments totaling $486,000 to Vale Advisory Group under safety modernization codes, while Ms. Vale exercised direct influence over launch decisions that implicated operational readiness. That creates governance, disclosure, and fraud concerns on multiple fronts. Richard finally exploded. He slammed his palm on the table and turned toward Daniel. Not me. You told me she was advisory. Symbolic. You told me there was no operational authority. Celeste snapped back before Daniel could answer. I had no authority to falsify anything. I gave branding recommendations. Monica spoke without raising her voice. You attended the April 7th meeting where Daniel said Adrian needed to be made non-credible. Every head turned. Monica reached into her portfolio and removed a printed email chain plus a transcript. You dictated follow-up notes to me in the car afterward. You told Daniel the board would never accept a role transition unless Adrian looked unstable or disloyal. Celeste's lips parted. You're lying. Monica met her eyes for the first time. No, I was employed. That line sat in the room like broken glass. Daniel found his anger again, because weak men often return to the only tool they know when frightened. You recorded internal conversations. You violated confidentiality. Monica looked almost bored. I preserved instructions after learning my credentials were being used on expenses I didn't authorize. Helena turned to Daniel, so sharply her chair legs scraped. You said Monica was loyal. Monica gave the smallest shrug. Loyalty is difficult to maintain when people start planning where to pin the fire. This was the unexpected ally reveal Naomi had been saving, but it wasn't just surprise that made it powerful. It was motive. Monica had not switched sides for money, drama, or righteousness. She switched because Daniel and Celeste had treated fidelity like a disposable resource and assumed she'd never noticed the moment they converted her from trusted witness to future scapegoat. People break in many ways. Quiet professionals tend to break into documentation. Naomi continued methodically. Each exhibit a new weight laid onto the same fault line. She showed the vendor invoices from Vail Advisory Group, the altered simulator roster, the message chain about route visuals going live regardless of operational readiness, the device registration logs. My original objections, written with dates, distribution lists, and sober language that made their own messages look feverish by comparison. She showed the board readiness summary bearing my signature certificate 2 days after my removal from approval authority. She showed Marcus's request for mailbox forwarding. She showed Daniel's text to me after my firing, especially the line Celeste had nothing to do with this, which now glowed with the soft stupidity of preemptive guilt. Then came the line that broke the room open. Louise placed the final packet in front of Richard Whitmore. There is also the matter of Aircraft 661. Richard frowned. What matter? The matter, Louise said. That was dispatched on a route requiring a maintenance review interval that had already lapsed under the documented standards Mr. Mercer had refused to waive. Richard looked at Daniel. Daniel said, it was within tolerance. Louise didn't blink. That's not what your maintenance director wrote. He slid over Warren's own message. If Mercer won't sign, we need alternative cover or we're rolling naked. Warren went ghost white. Richard stared at him. Did you write this? Warren swallowed. Daniel said the interval interpretation was conservative. I asked whether it was legal. Richard barked. Warren's eyes flicked helplessly to his attorney. I want separate time with counsel. And there it was, the fracture becoming a split. The group that had sat united in fluorescent righteousness, while accusing me now began to turn inward, each face searching for a safer enemy. Celeste blamed Daniel with her eyes before her mouth caught up. Helena began whispering fiercely to her attorney. Marcus kept wiping his palms against his trousers. Paul Renwick asked for a caucus. Richard looked older by the minute. Naomi sat back and let the implications settle over the room. I had said very little until then. That was intentional. People listen harder when the injured party doesn't plead. My restraint had become a kind of pressure in the room, present even in silence. Daniel knew it. He kept glancing at me the way gamblers look at the dealer after realizing the table was fixed against their luck. Finally, he turned to me directly. What do you want? Not an apology. Not even denial anymore. Just terms. I folded my hands on the table. You thought this was about my job. His nostrils flared. Then what is it? It's about the aircraft you put in the air while planning to make me the signature beneath the risk. Celeste let out a small, angry laugh. Please, you're enjoying this. No, I said, I'm finishing it. Richard looked at me then with something like recognition, maybe for the first time. Not affection, certainly not remorse. Just a dawning understanding that the quiet people in a room are often the ones holding the map. Naomi resumed, now in a language that ends executive fantasies. My client's demands are straightforward. Immediate rescission of the for-cause termination. Full settlement for wrongful termination and retaliation. Written board acknowledgement that Mr. Mercer raised protected safety and compliance concerns. Preservation and production of all records identified in our notices. Full cooperation with regulatory review. Immediate removal of any public or internal statement attributing misconduct to Mr. Mercer. And a self-disclosure package to the FAA and relevant authorities by close of business. Paul Renwick scoffed. You're asking this company to kneecap itself. Naomi's expression remained serene. No, I'm offering a chance to do that voluntarily before the government uses a larger instrument. Helena's attorney asked, and if the company declines? Naomi steepled her fingers. Then this evidence package goes wider. Insurers, regulators, lessors, auditors, and the Department of Transportation. We are also prepared to add individual claims and name parties. Criminal referral decisions are not mine, of course, but cooperation is usually remembered. Richard turned to Daniel. Did you understand any of this could become criminal? Daniel snapped. I understood Adrian was obstructing growth. You understood what you wanted, Helena muttered, too exhausted to stop herself. Celeste rounded on her. Don't you dare do this. You move the money. Helena laughed once, brittle as snapped glass. At your instruction. At Daniel's instruction, Celeste shot back. Warren suddenly said, I want immunity if records are being turned over. Marcus whispered, I just did what legal told me was acceptable. Legal? Paul Renwick said sharply. Don't put that on me. Voices layered. Chairs shifted. A glass tipped and spilled water across the oak in a bright, spreading sheet. The room sounded like an aircraft cabin losing pressure, control structure filling with human panic. And through it all, Monica sat still with her pen untouched, watching the people who had once spoken over her discover what their own voices sounded like when no one was following. I leaned back slightly and said to no one in particular, I wanted you to see them. That cut through the noise. Daniel stared at me. What? All of you, I said. I wanted you to see how fast loyalty disappears when truth arrives. No one spoke after that for several seconds. Then I added, because some truths deserve exact placement, and I made sure you found exactly what I wanted you to find. Paul Renwick frowned. What does that mean? I looked at Daniel. The leak email, the reports, the printouts. I knew you were searching for a pretext. So I tightened my files, flagged what mattered, and waited to see which documents you'd misuse first. Celeste whispered, You set us up. No, I said, you walked where the floor was weak, because you assumed I'd keep holding the beams. Luis allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. The caucus that followed lasted 90 minutes. I spent it in a smaller conference room down the hall with Naomi, Luis, and Monica. The room had pale stone countertops, matte black fixtures, and coffee so strong it tasted like consequence. Sunlight shifted across the floor as the morning turned toward noon. I loosened my tie half an inch. Monica finally drank the water in front of her. How bad is it for them? She asked. Naomi glanced at her phone. Worse by the minute. Because of the money. Because of the records. Luis said, Money embarrasses boards. False maintenance and training records terrify them. He was right. Financial misconduct can sometimes be spun as oversight failure, aggressive accounting, misguided executive behavior. But once aircraft records become unreliable, the entire operating certificate starts to look suspect. In aviation, trust is infrastructure. If the people signing the paperwork can't be trusted, the metal stays on the ground. At 12:17 p.m., Naomi's phone buzzed. She read the message, then handed it to me. The subject line was from Whitmore Air's outside board counsel. Draft terms /urgent. I read the first paragraph slowly. They wanted settlement. They would rescind the cause of termination, issue a neutral public statement pending review, place Daniel on temporary administrative leave, remove Celeste from all advisory and executive functions, preserve records, and initiate internal self-disclosure. They also wanted confidentiality around certain operational specifics. Of course they did. Men like Daniel always want silence right up to the moment silence becomes impossible. I looked up, and the fleet. Naomi's eyes sharpened. Page 3. There it was. Pending audit of specified maintenance, training, and dispatch records, Whitmore Air would voluntarily suspend operations of 12 aircraft and cancel affected long-haul expansion service. I set the phone down. Monica exhaled. 12. Louise corrected her quietly. For now. When we returned to the main room, the atmosphere had changed from denial to triage. Richard had removed his jacket. Daniel looked as if he'd aged a year in one morning. Celeste's lipstick had faded around the edges. Helena no longer pretended there was a unified defense. Warren wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Marcus kept staring at the door. Naomi reviewed the terms line by line, revising where needed, tightening language, removing escape hatches. She insisted on naming the protected nature of my disclosures. She insisted on document preservation monitored by outside counsel. She insisted on reference language, clearing my name. She insisted on indemnity provisions and non-disparagement that applied equally. She insisted because she understood that cowardly people always leave trapdoors in drafts unless someone closes them one by one. Richard signed first. His hand shook. Not much. Just enough to make the pen hesitate at the second syllable of his surname. Helena signed next, after a whispered consultation with counsel. Warren added his name with the look of a man initialing his own weather report. Marcus followed. Celeste refused at first, then demanded revisions, then signed once it was made clear refusal would isolate her personally from the company's cooperative posture. Daniel signed last. He looked at me before he put pen to paper. You could have handled this internally. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, I tried. In writing. He held my gaze for one long second, then signed. And because sometimes the universe is better timing than any writer could invent, that was the exact moment Paul Renwick's phone lit up, followed by Helena's, then Richard's, then Daniel's. A cluster of notifications. Urgent. Simultaneous. Helena picked up her phone first. Her face went blank. What? Richard demanded. She swallowed. The FAA acknowledged receipt of the supplemental package. Luis looked at Naomi. Naomi looked at me. Daniel snatched his own phone, scanned the screen, and stood so fast his chair rolled backward into the wall. This says immediate review order. Helena's voice was thin now. Certificate management wants specified aircraft removed from service pending records validation. How many? Richard asked. No one answered. He barked it louder. How many? Helena looked up. 18. The silence that followed had weight. 18 aircraft. Grounded pending validation. Not the whole airline, not yet, but enough of the backbone to cripple the schedule, trigger headlines, spook lessors, enrage investors, and turn Daniel's glossy expansion fantasy into a parking lot of expensive metal. In a network our size, 18 was blood loss. Daniel stared at me with a hatred so naked it almost looked like grief. You did this. I rose from my chair, buttoned my jacket, and gathered my copy of the signed agreement. No, I said. You did. I just stopped covering it. Then I turned to Celeste, whose eyes had gone glassy with the realization that all the photographs, magazine plans, launch parties, and branded cocktails in the world could not persuade a grounded aircraft to move. You wanted a transformation function. I said quietly, there it is. And I left the room. The first headline hit 2 hours later. Whitmore Air delays Caribbean launch amid internal compliance review. Then another. CEO on leave as regional carrier faces record scrutiny. By evening, the word grounded had begun appearing in trade publications, then local outlets, then national business coverage. They never get the first version exactly right, but they get enough right to change the weather. Flights were canceled. Passengers complained. Analysts questioned oversight. Investors demanded calls. Anonymous insiders began leaking to reporters because once an institution starts bleeding credibility, everyone suddenly remembers where the exits are I spent that evening at home again, but this time with the curtains open to a summer storm pressing against the windows. Rain streaked the glass in silver threads. Thunder rolled low over Charlotte. My phone lit up so often, I finally placed it face down on the kitchen counter and finished cooking dinner before I looked. There were texts from 3 former colleagues, 2 reporters, Daniel, Celeste, and a number I didn't recognize but assumed belonged to Richard's attorney. Daniel said, "You destroyed thousands of innocent people's livelihoods." That was the message men like him always send when consequences reach beyond them. They wrap themselves in everyone else's suffering and call it principle. I archived it. Celeste said, "You never understood what Daniel was trying to build." I archived that too. The message from the unknown number was shorter. Mr. Mercer, Richard Whitmore requests a private conversation. No, the next few weeks were a study in orderly collapse. Whitmore Air announced an expanded operational review and suspended the Caribbean routes entirely. Then the voluntary suspension widened because once regulators start cross-checking one category records, other categories rarely remain quiet. Investors pushed for an independent committee. Daniel's leave became indefinite. Celeste vanished from the company website within 48 hours. Then from Daniel's social media within 72. Helena entered active cooperation. Warren Pike was placed on administrative leave pending certification review. Marcus Bell hired a reputation management firm, which is the corporate equivalent of spraying cologne on smoke. 6 weeks later, I moved into a new office, not because I had to, because I wanted a room that did not smell like Whitmore Air. It was on the 3rd floor of a restored brick building in South End with tall industrial windows, old pine floors, matte steel shelving, and morning light that poured across the conference table like something clean. The first day I took possession, I unlocked the door before sunrise, set my leather briefcase on the floor, and stood in the empty center of the room listening to the quiet. No badge reader, no executive floor gossip, no inherited surname on the wall, just space. I opened the windows a few inches and let in the cool air. Then I set a ceramic mug on the sill, poured black coffee from a thermos, and watched sunlight crawl across the neighboring rooftops. That simple pleasure, a hot cup in a room no one else controlled, felt more luxurious than any club dinner Daniel had ever expensed. Fresh starts rarely arrive with music. They arrive with ordinary peace. You suddenly realize no one can invoice back from you. Mercer Advisory began as a consulting practice and turned into something else within 3 months. At first, companies came to me for what they thought they wanted. Risk review, leadership process audits, crisis containment, compliance framework cleanup. Then the calls changed. A pilot union asked whether I would help train representatives to document retaliation. A regional carrier asked me to review the governance boundaries between branding and operations. A private equity group evaluating an aviation acquisition wanted to know how executive vanity distorts safety reporting. Then came the most satisfying clients of all, quiet professionals inside noisy companies who had finally realized that being indispensable is not the same thing as being protected. I built the firm around the skills Whitmore Air had forced me to sharpen: documentation discipline, sequence analysis, executive risk containment, protected disclosure strategy. The irony was almost elegant. Daniel and Celeste had tried to remove me as an obstacle. Instead, they had funded the blueprint for my second career. And because karma likes detail, every principal player at Whitmore Air received consequences fitted to their own choices. Daniel Whitmore lost his position first. The board announced his resignation to support the company's transition and ongoing review, which is a polished way of saying he was pushed toward the door while still pretending he chose it. Industry publications that once called him the future of boutique regional aviation began referring to him as the former Whitmore Air chief executive. 2 finance conferences quietly removed him from panel rosters. A lender dispute surfaced around executive disclosures. A governance advisory firm issued a blistering note about concentration of authority and conflicted influence. For a man who had built himself out of magazine profiles and keynote photographs, professional diminishment was not just a setback, it was amputation. Celeste Vale tried to recover publicly before privately. She posted once a black and white photograph of a handwritten note about resilience. The comments were brutal. Then she disappeared for a while, resurfaced in Palm Beach at Charity Gala, and found that invitations were no longer the same thing as status. Vail Advisory lost the clients that had once enjoyed her because luxury brands do not like consultants whose names appear beside words like record scrutiny and governance concerns. She had chased legitimacy through proximity to power, and when power turned radioactive, she discovered she had no protective skin of her own. Richard Whitmore suffered the consequence proud patriarchs fear most. Not legal, not financial, but social. He kept his money, of course. Men like Richard almost always do. But board seats became awkward. Donor dinners cooled. Old friends began having scheduling conflicts. He had spent decades building a reputation for disciplined stewardship and family continuity. What broke him was not that his son failed. It was that everyone learned the family name had become a shield for recklessness. Helena Price negotiated, cooperated, and survived in the technical sense, but she did not emerge intact. She resigned before the final internal report was released. Recruiters who once called weekly stopped calling. The market for CFOs with strong hands and quiet signatures gets thin when those signatures appear near altered allocations and undisclosed related party payments. She had spent years thinking she was the adult in every room. Then she learned adults are expected to walk out before children start playing with aircraft. Warren Pike faced the kind of humiliation only specialists truly understand. His certifications were reviewed. His peers stopped returning calls. In aviation maintenance circles, competence is currency and credibility is oxygen. He had gambled both on Daniel's confidence and Celeste's timetable. The result was professional exile by 1,000 muttered conversations in hangars and conference bars. He did not go to prison. Sometimes people imagine that means they got away with it. They underestimate what it means to lose the respect of the only room that ever knew how valuable you once were. Marcus Bell lasted longer than I expected, mostly because HR people are practiced at standing 1 inch outside the blast radius and claiming they were only there to document it. But depositions are unforgiving, and so are email chains. His role in the mailbox access review and performance caused scaffolding became too visible to ignore. He left under the language of personal transition, then spent the next year discovering that senior HR openings are surprisingly scarce when your name is associated with retaliatory sequencing. Even the enablers at the edges receive their own reckonings. A communications vice president who had ghostwritten talking points about my leadership instability found her private Slack messages quoted in an internal inquiry and was asked to resign. A board liaison who had laughed when Celeste referred to me as the human speed bump lost his committee support. People imagine justice as thunder, more often arrives as calendar emptiness. The messages kept coming for months. Daniel moved through predictable stages: rage, negotiation, self-pity, strategic nostalgia. First it was, "You'll regret making enemies like this." Then, "We can still settle the narrative if you're smart." Then, "Adrian, you know I was under pressure from my father." Then, after a gap of 2 weeks, "The one that told the truth. I built that place with you, and you know it wasn't supposed to end like this." I never answered. Celeste's messages were stranger, more personal, more manipulative. She sent one late on a Sunday with only 3 words: "You enjoyed winning." Another 3 days later: "Daniel misses who he was before this." Then one that actually made me laugh out loud in my office: "I think we could have been allies under different circumstances." No, I thought, under different circumstances, you would simply have chosen a different table. Richard wrote, once by email, formal, controlled. The subject line read closure. In the second paragraph, he said, "The family is not the same," as if the real damage in all of this had been to a dinner arrangement, as if the grounded aircraft, the falsified records, the employees thrown into uncertainty, and the attempted destruction of my name were all secondary to the emotional inconvenience of a diminished dynasty. I archived that too. Archiving became a ritual. I did it every Friday afternoon. Messages, missed calls, forwarded rumors, the occasional reporter inquiries still fishing for bitterness. I kept everything, not because I intended to use it, because order is a form of freedom. Once you stop reacting, you start curating. That changes the power of the past. Monica joined Mercer Advisory in the 4th month. The press liked calling her a whistleblower, which wasn't wrong, but it missed her essence. Monica was not theatrical enough. to become a symbol. She was better than that. She became my head of operations, then my closest strategic partner. The woman who had once managed Daniel's life with invisible precision now built systems that kept our clients from becoming him. She could read a board packet in 12 minutes and tell you which executive was lying by page 3. She also made a terrifying lemon tart and kept a tin of jasmine tea in the office kitchen that somehow improved every brutal day. One Thursday afternoon in October, she leaned against my office door with her phone in hand, and a smile she was trying not to enjoy too much. "You won't believe who I just saw at Charlotte Douglas," she said. I looked up from a client memo. "Who?" "Daniel. Gate B12. Commercial. Group 6. I sat back in my chair. Sunlight from the west windows turned the edge of my desk amber. "Alone." "Completely?" She crossed her arms. "No lounge escort. No assistant. No black SUV. Just a rolling suitcase in the face of a man discovering overhead bin competition." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Monica's smile widened. He was flying to Tulsa for an energy conference panel. The event website still listed him as keynote. Someone forgot to update. That seems on brand. She said he asked the gate agent if there was any way to board earlier because he was, and I quote, "accustomed to priority handling." And the gate agent said, "Sir, everyone in this line thinks they are." That little karma update stayed with me all week. Not because I needed humiliation for Daniel. I was past that, but because there was something perfect in the ordinary scale of it. A man who had once rearranged careers, budgets, and compliance structures for vanity now stood in a public queue being told he was not exceptional. Justice doesn't always need a courtroom voice. Sometimes it wears a gate agent smile and keeps scanning boarding passes. 6 months after mediation, I ran into Celeste for the first time. It happened at the rooftop bar of the Ashbourne Hotel on a cool November evening. I was there meeting Naomi after a long day with a client audit team. The terrace was strung with low amber lights, and the city beneath us had already begun to glow, office towers in rectangles of gold. Traffic drifting below like molten wire. The bar top was dark stone, smooth under the hand. The air smelled faintly of citrus peel and smoke from the heat lamps. Celeste was standing near the far railing with another woman I recognized a second later. Sophia Marin, a fashion editor who had once featured Celeste in a spread titled "The New Face of Southern Luxury Leadership." Now Sophia looked impatient. Celeste looked thinner, sharper at the edges, beautiful still, but in the fragile way expensive things look when their owners stop dusting them. She saw me before I had the chance to decide whether I wanted that. Her posture changed. Not much. Just enough. Sophia glanced between us, read the air correctly, and muttered something before walking away toward the bar. Celeste came over holding a coupe glass by the stem with fingers that looked perfectly steady until you noticed the tiny pulse at her wrist. "Adrian." "Celeste." The city wind lifted a strand of her hair and pressed the silk of her blouse lightly against her shoulder. Below us, sirens moved somewhere distant and low. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. "I imagine that's happened a lot this year." For a second, the old sharpness flashed in her eyes. Then it faded into something more tired. She let out a breath. "You always did know how to make a line sound cleaner than a knife." Occupational habit. She looked down at her glass. "Daniel says you destroyed him." I glanced out over the skyline, orange light bleeding from the western horizon behind darkening buildings. "Daniel says many things." Her laugh was soft and genuinely humorless. "That hasn't changed." We stood in silence for a moment, a comfortable silence on my part, a searching one on hers. Then she said, "For what it's worth, I didn't understand how much of that machine was already built to use people." I turned back to her. "You use it easily enough." She nodded. "Yes." That honesty, small as it was, made her suddenly look more human than she ever had at Whitmore. "I was very good," she said quietly, "at believing I was only helping shape perception, that I wasn't touching the dangerous parts. That's what everyone near power tells themselves." She met my eyes. "And now," I said, "I pay close attention when someone says optics before operations." A corner of her mouth lifted, still concise. Naomi appeared then with 2 drinks and one look at Celeste that carried an entire legal memo inside it. Celeste noticed, gave me the faintest nod, and said, "Goodbye, Adrian." "Goodbye, Celeste." As she walked away, Naomi handed me my glass. "Should I ask?" "No." "Good," Naomi said. "I prefer mysteries when they're no longer dangerous." That winter settled into a kind of stability I had never known while working under the Whitmore name. There were hard days, of course. Building something clean is real labor, but it is a different kind of exhaustion when the work belongs to your values instead of someone else's appetite. Monica and I expanded the firm, hired 2 analysts and a former airline labor negoti.